Just checking mics. Great. It worked. All right. All right, I will call the St. Paul City Council organizational meeting to order. Good morning, folks who are tuning in, folks who are here in person. Today at our org policy committee meeting, we will be getting an update on gun violence prevention work in the city, as well as community first public safety updates. And I think these are updates that council has been anxiously looking forward to hearing. We have a great panel of guests that will be presenting, including our Ramsey County Attorney, John Choi, our County Chair, County Board Chair, Trista Mattis-Castillo, our Assistant Police Chief, Rob Thomaser. Then we will be getting an overview of the Community First Public Safety that we heard the mayor roll out yesterday at the State of the City address, and we have several presenters. We'll go through that at the moment. So we have quite a bit of ground to cover today before 11:30, and so I have often mentioned that I have the unenviable task of keeping us going, and just remind people that we have opportunities for follow-up conversations if questions come up that we can't answer today. But I think it's very important that we are here to learn, we are here to work together, and that we will get further if we are focused on problem solving and not on blaming or critiquing each other in our work. And we recently had a presentation at our GVI University that the presenter reminded us that it is us versus violence, and that it fails when elected officials don't get along or don't stay on point. So I think it's really important that we keep our focus as us versus violence, and that will be kind of our theme today. So to get us started, I'm going to turn things over for a moment to Councilmember Tolbert to frame up a little bit of the background, or, yeah. All right, so I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Tolbert for just to frame up the, yeah, well, all right, I guess, I'm sorry, just a little bit of the background, and I think Ramsey County Attorney John Choi will say this as well, but the Gun Violence Prevention Group is a group that has been meeting for approximately a year, informally. Really started out as a conversation that the county attorney had suggested, and some council members, Mr. Tolbert and I took him up on that suggestion, brought the mayor into the conversation. It became quickly apparent that we needed more players at the table in order to really dig in and understand what our challenges were and what things were going well. There was a lot of interest in moving forward with a group violence intervention initiative, or a focused deterrence. And in order to do that, we needed to have the county board at the table. We needed the sheriff's department, the police, our social service workers, and Healing Streets, really to look at this as a holistic problem. We've heard the police say a million times, you can't police your way out of these issues. And so recognizing how can we support our traditional public safety efforts with a full array of resources and tools to get at problems that have taken generations to be built, generations if not eons. So, Mr. Tolbert.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. Thank you, Council President Bremo, and just go back to when our Public Safety Leadership Group started, just to remind people, and unfortunately we were in somewhat similar spot where we are now, where we saw an increase of violent carjackings amongst other violent crime happening in our city, much of it revolving around guns, something that has just plagued our city and plagued, quite frankly, our country quite a bit, and something that we need to get under wraps. But last year at the time when we saw this increase of violent carjacking, especially I think for the police department, something that was an aberration, the time of year that it was happening. Usually that's not when the violence happens, in February, March. County Attorney Choi had the idea to convene a table to try and break down some of the silos. And it's a table that's been really important because it's data driven, it's weekly, it cuts through many of the bureaucracies and kind of natural silos and bureaucracies that happen in government. And, you know, but with County Attorney Choi's leadership, Council President Brenmo and Mayor Carter, Police Chief Axtell, and many others from the St. Paul Police Department, as well as County Administrator O'Connor, and many members of the county board, as well as the sheriff's office. It's a table that allows people to work together, air grievances sometimes, disagree, but more importantly, as the council president mentioned, continue to try and stay on point and focus on stopping the violence before it starts, preventing the violence, and sometimes after the fact having to intervene because people are committing violence and entering people into the criminal justice system. But it's been a really important group. We still have a lot of work to do. I think everybody knows that. But one of the things I continue to appreciate is it's very data driven, and it's something that I've continued to say our police department deserves a lot of credit because they really do really good data driven research and present it to us and respond accordingly. And so this group has helped focus that. But like I said, especially considering some of the very tragic events that we've had in the past week or so, we still have a lot of work to do, but I think it's important that people are sitting at the table and everyone's willing to work, and that's an important thing because, as the council president said, it's us versus the violence, and that's the most important thing. So thank you very much for convening this and your leadership, County Attorney Choi.
We'll turn things over to you.
Great. Thank you, Council President Brenmoen and members of the City Council. Thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation today. And of course, I just love how you kind of frame the issue about recognizing that one of the most critical pieces, if we really want to make an impact around reducing violence in our community, is that everybody that is at the table around violence reduction, we all want it to stop. We all want it to go away. But the critical piece of all of this is recognizing that we all have to be working together, aligned, and pulling in the same direction. If everybody is pulling but we're not aligned, then I think what ends up happening is that we don't have coordinated responses to violence. And I think over the course of the past year, we've been really trying to do that, and I think we've made a lot of progress in aligning the values. I mean, let's just be really clear. First of all, the levels of violence that we are experiencing in this community are unacceptable. Nobody should be living in fear of being carjacked or being shot or killed in our community. And that level of stress and feeling, regardless of what the data says, it really matters. And I know that I've talked to enough residents in our city today that are feeling that way. And so I think we owe it to the public not just to do the best that we can, but to do the best that we can in a coordinated fashion, and to really dig deep on this issue and recognize that one particular actor or sector or responder can't solve this epidemic that we're having right now in violence, that we need to bring in all sorts of disciplines and our community to the table to better understand what's going on, and not let fear rule the day in terms of how we think about actually combating violence. It was about a year ago, and maybe if I could get to the first slide that has the carjacking statistics. It was about a year ago. Interestingly, now I think more people in the metropolitan area are feeling this sense of that their safety has been diminished. But about a year ago, this was very acute here in the city of St. Paul. In fact, I remember very vividly, Councilmember Tao, Councilmember Naker, Councilmember Brenmoen Tolbert, Councilmember Prince, and I don't know if Councilmember Yang had called me, but there was lots of calls coming to my office, like, what are we going to do, right? Because you were all receiving those phone calls about the upticks in violence, the carjackings, right, and the homicide rate increasing and the shots fired. And I think in those moments, oftentimes, we quickly want to figure out, like, is there who do we blame for this, or who do we, what is going on, and we try to diagnose it ourselves, right? And in fact, you actually asked the police department to come to your city council meeting, and it was Assistant Chief Thomaser who was here, who gave a presentation, and he gave some examples of maybe 3 incidents or 3 individuals in the justice system about this revolving door, right? But there was more to understand. And since then, Assistant Chief Thomas and I and Chief Axel had an opportunity to really delve deep into those cases. And through those conversations, what we found was that there was a lot of things related to this Rule 20 gap that we have in our community about people who have mental illness and they can't be prosecuted in court because they're ruled incompetent. And so then if we can't prosecute them, we can't hold them, right? And so then they get released, and we don't have a solution at the state level or at the local level to address this gap because we can't civilly commit every person to an institution because the standard to commit is a much higher standard versus the incompetency standard. But that dialogue and understanding and then thinking about what do we do to make fixes to that, right? We also, one of those examples that was presented to you was also we learned more about the cash bail system. Today in America, on this planet, we're one of the only 3 countries that have a wealth-based system about how you can stay in jail or not in jail. And what we learned there is that a lot of people were being bailed out because there's an organization in our community that was simply posting the cash for a lot of these individuals, right? And so it's through those dialogues that I think we gain a better understanding of what's going on, but then more importantly, what are we going to do about it, right? So we have had conversations with the Minnesota Freedom Fund about trying to change some of their practices. We've been working on solutions, and we've convened tables that the Chief Judge Castro is working on to work on the Rule 20 issue so that the courts are trying to be more responsive and figure out ways in which maybe we could constitutionally hold people in the right types of circumstances. So it's through those conversations that what really matters. And so the table that we created formally, we started having these conversations in March, but then in April we started actually having these meetings. But I wanted to, just before I go into the membership of the group, as you can see, when I alluded to a year ago, it was January and February of 2021 where we were experiencing the highest incidences of carjacking in our community. It's something that we had never experienced before, and so it was a very unsettling time. And so every meeting, we're looking at this data and we're trying to think about, and we're actually taking responsibility at this table about how do we pull together and start turning around these numbers, because even one is unacceptable. And so obviously we have a much different rate of carjacking than we do here versus in Minneapolis, but that's neither here nor there. Just having one is unacceptable, so we need to think about ways, but I think the table has helped us do that. And so that table that we created in February, as you had mentioned, Council President Brenmo, it consists of our Ramsey County Board Chair, our County Manager, County Attorney, our Sheriff, our Mayor, City Council members, City Attorney, Police Chief, and then we also bring to the table our social services, our public health, and then we've recently also added Mayor Lee Abrams from Maplewood, and we're going to add a suburban chief, and we have Chief Judge Castro now added to that group as well. And through this work, what we've been able to accomplish, I think the first thing is that we get on the same page, at least on the values about what we're trying to do. And then secondly, what we've been working on is to identify things that we can start working on together. So one of the things that we identified right out of the chute was that we needed to get some more resources around our response to auto theft and carjacking. And through the group and through the Sheriff's Office and my office, we applied for funds through the Minnesota Department of Commerce to get a grant to allow us to increase our investigative capacity as well as our prosecution capacity, which now forms the CAT team that the Sheriff's Office has employed. And also, we have funding for our community to work on some intervention strategies with our youth, working through the African American Leadership Council on the Black Ministerial Alliance. Also through the conversations that we've had in the group, again, related to resources, we all decided to apply for a $900,000 direct appropriation through Representative McCollum's office. I'm very hopeful that we are going to be able to get that accomplished. I believe maybe sometime in March, we should be able to see that legislation pass. And that will go a long way, because as a part of what we've been talking about, we've recognized that if we wanted to have all of the efforts around violence intervention coordinated, we needed to have a strategy that we could all agree on, right? And I think through the conversations that we've had throughout the year and starting to build out some of this work, I really believe that we're at a place now where we're moving forward with group violence intervention, and we're utilizing those focused deterrent strategies around trying to get at the violence. That's the only proven intervention that actually works. And the premise of it is very simple, that we're asking community and police to come together and work together, and we're supporting them to do notifications and interventions with people that we know are involved in the violence, right? So if they're involved in the shootings, or if they're involved in the carjackings, and by the way, we'll be the first community in the country to actually start using some of the focused deterrent strategies around carjackings, and I'm really excited about that. But if we listen to what our law enforcement leaders are saying, Chief Axtell, Sheriff Fletcher, they have been very consistent, and I believe them. And I think that our group, we're starting to understand that the problems that are caused by the shootings and the carjackings, it's a really small number. And if we can actually do the effective interventions, right, which involve the enforcement of our laws, and it also involves figuring out ways that we can activate services and support for these families and these young people that are involved, we can actually turn this around. I really believe it, and actually history has proven that this type of approach, if it's coordinated and everybody's on the same page, we can get that done. So that $900,000, the first half of it is going to need to be utilized to pay for the technical assistance that we're embarking on. Thank you to Everytown for Gun Safety, who allowed some of their funds to be used for our technical assistance so that we could get started this past fall. And also, too, I want to call out the leadership of our county board and our county manager, who I think over the summer, as we were having these conversations and we started doing some interventions around young people who we suspected of being involved in carjacking, they have built out in the county kind of like a portal or a front door by which police can have figure out a way to share the information with county services, but then also then have access to those services and support that the county has available. And so I think that piece of it was very complicated, but it's something that I think it's going to prove to be very beneficial to us. And then through the now we're kind of evolving in terms of our conversations. We're starting to have a more deeper conversation about the role that secure placement needs to play with regard to our response. And we're going to have a meeting coming up, I think, in the next few weeks, and we'll go deeper into that conversation. But it's we're surfacing kind of these things that we need to be working on, talking about, aligning our values around, and then trying to figure out how we actually make those things happen. So the table that was created, I think, has been very beneficial to the extent that we have, I think, brought people together to start pulling in the same direction. I want to thank the council members for being a part of those conversations and that actually work, but also, too, recognizing that the path forward is not about quickly diagnosing and getting to some sort of judgment. It's about actually understanding and curiosity about what's happening and then actually pulling together in the same direction. So with that, I think I'll just stop there and can certainly stand for more questions whenever would be the right time.
Okay, and we probably should hold questions till the end if possible, unless it's clarifying along the way, just to respect our time. I do want to thank you for your leadership in this initiative, and also point out that I think if it wasn't a problem with quorum, all council members would be sitting at the table. I know Ms. Prince sent her legislative aide just to make sure that we were part of it. We as council members, have a lot of accountability on public safety measures, but in practice, we're fairly insulated from corrections and social services and what happens at the prosecutor's office and even what happens in the police department beyond the budget. So being able to sit at the table has been a learning experience for a lot of us and has made us, we feel like we're part of problem solving as opposed to feeling sort of helpless in light of the questions we're getting from constituents and knowing that there is an all hands on deck approach that has been and is underway and is getting better all the time. And I think thanks in part to the table. So what I'd like to do, I'm looking at you, County Chair, is switch to, places with you and Assistant Chief Thomaser, let you do the data update,
Sure.
and then go to the chair.
Can you, Brent, can you switch them? Thank you. Well, good morning and thank you. And I echo what everybody says and appreciate County Attorney Choi and his leadership on this initiative and bringing the table together. I think that was a great move for the region. And again, thank you for your leadership on that. One of the things that the meeting does is, as you point out, Council President Brenmoen, is that the group gets a batch of data, which is a catalyst to a discussion of trying to find solutions. What are we trying to solve? And what I'd like to do here today is share that data with the rest of the group and with everybody watching so that you can see a little bit how this dialogue goes and what measures we're paying attention to help influence how we prioritize the mission of this group. There's a couple things I should say about the data as we get going here is as we get to the global view of the 2021 data, we're working on publishing the year-end report for the department, and there might be a couple subtle changes as we finish that, but overall, it's pretty close to what I think it's going to shake out. If I could have slide 2, please. So to recap 2021, I think what we try to do is start with sort of a global look and then kind of refine down, and as County Attorney showed in his data, is kind of a what does it look like over time. So as we look at our 2021 data, what you can see is since about 2018, there's been a steady increase of crime in most of the categories that we're paying attention to. I think the data supports what everybody was feeling and making phone calls about, and that is gun violence is and was on the rise. I think as you look at the data and have time to digest this over time, you'll see that not all data is moving at the same pace, and that you'll see some changes in gun recoveries. The gun recoveries have not been on the same trajectory as the crime has gone up, and there's probably a couple explanations for that. And in complete transparency, there's probably fewer proactive initiatives going on just because of the current capacity of the department. But I would say that data is misleading in that as I look at the crimes of the day, there's certainly more crimes on the street, even though that data point doesn't reflect that. And I think that's something we speak about transparently as we have these conversations. If we go to slide 3, you'll see that we're now starting to narrow down the data that we look at. So we're going to kind of focus in on it over time. And what you're looking at here is we're looking at the data numbers for 2022 as it compares to 2021 for the same period of time. And again, most of the categories, the trends are not what we want to see, but not in every case. As County Attorney Choi points out, is that we were having a significant spike of carjackings at this time of year last year, and there's been some progress made there. We've learned a lot about who commits those crimes. We learned a lot about the way that we can respond to those crimes and provide awareness to the public. So I think you can see that that's probably a success to record, but we still have a lot of work to do, as you can see. Moving to slide 4. What you see is this provides a 3-year comparison broken down by month, showing when we report people who are struck by gunfire. It helps us to analyze over time how we're doing in the same time periods before. 2022 is not off to a good start, as we can see, and that's something that I think has been reflected in what your constituents are calling about or the calls of service that we're receiving. There are more guns on the street and there are more people being shot than previous years, and I think hopefully some long-term solutions will impact that. The data also shows who's being shot, and what you'll see is in the lower left corner of that the graph, it shows the age and the race of the people who are being shot. If you look at this at a larger span of time, this data is sort of bucking what the trend has been for the last couple of years. In the last couple of years, very sadly, the number of, or the number of African American males being shot is represented in about the 75 percentile, certainly over 70%. That's a little bit different starting out in 2022, but we'll have to watch that over time. But really, it's males, and it's African American males that are being shot predominantly. Currently, our data 2022 says the average age of a person getting shot is in their 30s. I think if we look at a larger window of time, we're going to see that age category drop a little bit. But that's what we're trying to analyze is who's at risk and how do we develop programs to get to those who are at risk. Next slide, please. So this is to bring an understanding of where people are being shot in our city. I know certainly the council's pays attention to their wards, but this sort of shows everybody sort of graphically where people are being shot, and it shows both 2021 and 2022 data. And it's about, I think, helping us understand where to find resources in the neighborhoods, where to deploy police officers, and how to come up with strategies to combat things. So not just talking about the problem holistically as it's happening, but try to drill down into specifics as to come up with very specific and unique responses in particular areas if it calls for that. If we move on to the next slide, we'll see the same maps, but different data. Now we're showing where guns are being fired in the city. It's important to note that this is where guns are being fired and reported. And I think there's a distinction to be made here in that data, and reported is important because I think it's maybe understandable, but certainly a trend that we see that a lot of gunfire that occurs in the city is not reported. And when we talk to people who live in the city, we ask, why didn't you call? And we'll hear everything from fatigue. I hear it all the time. My neighbor will call because they're really good about calling. We'll hear that we don't want to bother the 911 system or things of that nature. So I think that the data is underrepresented as we look at this, and something we have to consider. We have gone out and done canvassing of neighborhoods for particular shooting, and we'll come across shell casings from other shootings we didn't even know about. So it's sort of a trend, and something that we worked on with our gang unit in conjunction with our Crime Gun Intelligence Center. Recovering casings is important because we can take those casings that have a very unique fingerprint identifier, so to speak, and we can match up shootings that go together and try to find the guns that are responsible. One of the things I would note, I know everybody's still processing the information about Julia Lee. When Julia Lee was shot, we believe there was at least 4 shots fired in that case, and no one called. She was found because she was in her car, but no one called in her shots fired, and that would be an example of how this data is underrepresented.
And Assistant Chief, I think it's a good opportunity because we are broadcasting this and people are watching and paying attention, that the request is that folks call in shots fired, that they're not troubling our 911 system. They're basically our iteration of a shot spotter when we can triangulate where shots are fired by based on calls in. So it just takes a moment to make that call, and we need that information in order to understand where our trouble spots are in this situation, possibly to have saved a life.
Council President Brenwan, thank you for the clarification, and exactly that. The data that we need comes from the public, and the public has to be part of the solution and part of the overall initiative that we have with the entire violence reduction group, and certainly how they contribute will certainly help us form our programs, respond to these incidents as they occur, and hopefully lead us to success in a quicker way. I'm not going to digress a whole lot. That's the end of the data. I just want to say quickly that having lived in the city my whole life and having been on this job for 32 years now, I think the climate that our officers are responding to out there is concerning. We've had a lot of gun-related crimes. We've had a lot of in-progress gun-related crimes that our police officers are responding to every day. And our officers are doing a phenomenal job of showing up and de-escalating. and doing everything they can to avoid that instance that we're all trying to avoid, an officer getting injured or an officer-involved shooting. And I have to say that I'm concerned that we are on borrowed time. We have officers who have been shot at. We have officers who have had guns pointed at them as recently as this weekend with a man with a rifle out on the west side. We should be proud of our police officers for the way that they're handling this and de-escalating, using the tools that we give them that are less lethal. But I just want to caution the council that I'm concerned about what may occur leading in the future, and I think that's what's driving the police department to be so committed to this, to try to help not just the police officers that have to respond, but those who are living in our city and dealing with this issue. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Prince, did you have a question?
Yeah, Chief Thomas, sir, I am really grateful for that warning that you just gave us. I think it's clear when we're down 100 officers that we are on borrowed time. A couple of questions I have, and I'll be really quick. One is, ShotSpotter was just mentioned. I would love it if we could move in that direction. So is there any chance we could do ShotSpotter? Because our officers are also responding to backfiring engines and fireworks and every other thing. The other thing, I am concerned somewhat with the tone here that we've figured out how we're going to move forward and that this is all we need to do. I just want to speak to the fact that there was a lot of random violence on the east side last week. And it's my understanding that that we've been able to investigate 2 of them and have found the shooters. And I just wondered if you could tell us anything about what we know about them.
So the Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Prince, the question about the ShotSpotter, I think, should be deferred to the mayor's office. I think the mayor's made a policy decision on that, and that's for him to decide. And I think that has all played out and been well discussed, so I'll not digress into that. The violence on the east side is, I think, not just limited to the east side, as the maps show, that same violence that you're seeing and experiencing in your ward is a little bit more widespread than that. We have had a number of tragic incidents that have led to people losing their lives recently. And as I sit here today, I'm thinking the last 3 arrests of people for the crime of murder have now been juveniles. And that's a trend that's disturbing, shocking, and something we're trying to take on. And I appreciate what County Attorney Choi said in the beginning, that my initial briefing to the council a year ago talked about the revolving door. I think that's still work that we have to do, and I think we're diving into that very collectively, in that we still have some juveniles and even young adults who are being failed by the system, that are making decisions that are not in their best interest, and those decisions are impacting others in our city, and there's not a really solid way to intervene with those children to keep them from making those bad decisions until we can get them to see the world through a different world, or through a different light. That's certainly a challenge that we have. I think if we understand and look at this data and we were to analyze it by who's committing the crimes, County Attorney Choi is right, same thing as the chief and sheriff have said, a small percentage of people are committing these crimes. I think if you look at just the crime data, and I think this has been reported by some of the media outlets, the crime data would show that certainly in Miss Lee's case, the person responsible, their behavior was sort of predictable. And I think if we looked at cases from 2021, we could make that same connection, that at least I would say a third of our homicides in 2021 were committed by people who had a very recent violent past, caught for that, and were somewhere in the court process, and were out and had an opportunity to commit another crime that severely impacted not only the person who they committed the crime against, but their own life. And so I think these are things we have to dig into, have to understand better of how do we prevent people who we know who are on that violent trajectory from preventing them from being able to do that.
Thank you, Chief Thomaser. And to that point, will you be talking today about a secure placement? Because, of course, Boys Totem Town is in my ward, was a very good neighbor. And many people feel that the closure of Boys Totem Town was premature. And I do know that we have a problem with secure placement for juveniles, which is very concerning, and that we're having to send them to Red Wing and we're sending them to Moorhead, which is not helpful. Communities that don't know how to deal with our kids and where their families can't be in contact with them. So if you were going to be speaking about that, I would like to hear that.
Yeah, that's the intention. The chair is here from Ramsey County, and I know that just yesterday we had an update from corrections, and so we'll get some information on that next.
Thanks.
And probably not all of the information, but we certainly can invite corrections to come and present to us as well. So we'll shift gears. Thank you, Assistant Chief Thomaser, for your updated information. Mr. Tao. Mr. Tao, can we just make sure your mic's on? It looked like it was, maybe they got it. Oh, now it's off. Now it's on.
Check.
Yeah.
Okay. Assistant Chief, you mentioned that there are a bunch of firearms that are being recovered. Do we know if these firearms that are being used and recovered, are they from St. Paul? Are they from Minnesota? Where are these weapons coming from?
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Tao, thanks for the question. I think the data is inconclusive. There are gaps in the tracking, the system that tracks firearms. When a person purchases a firearm from a FFL dealer, that's the original vendor that sells the gun, there's a record of that. A lot of times what happens after that initial sale, the tracking of that gun is lost if it was sold in between people or something like that. There is an ability for us to, and we do this through our Crime Gun Intelligence Center, in trying to track the origins of guns, and we've been having good success working with the ATF, who has access to these original sale points, and we do all we can in part of our investigation to try to track that. But I think there's a lot of guns where we can't track to an original origin, or there's just gaps from the last person we can get to who owned it legally. We know that there's an increase in guns from burglaries and theft from autos that are occurring. There's a number of guns that are recovered weekly in the city that are listed as stolen from either our city or other cities. So it's kind of a mixed bag as to where the guns are coming from. It's not just one source. But again, there are gaps in the data of what the system allows us to track with all guns.
Okay. And then you mentioned that some of the young people that are committing these acts of violence, data has shown that we can identify some of those young people. Is that correct?
Councilmember Tao, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
The histories of these young people are known. That's something that the system does track very well.
Okay.
So when violence is committed, we can see very much. And of course, in the benefit of me speaking about this today, hindsight is always 20/20, right? We have the benefit of knowing that after the murder was committed. You don't always know that before. So there's a lot of things and decisions that are being made without that final piece of information known.
Yeah.
But sometimes there are some predictability to what people are doing in their lives.
Okay. And do you think that maybe because of the young people were introduced to violence or at a very young age or whatnot, that they require more intense focused support from the community? Like the system that they're in or the help that we're providing right now, maybe it's not working?
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Tao, that's exactly what we're working with County Attorney Choi to figure out, a balance between those who need to be maybe removed from society and incarcerated. I'm not sure the term that the county attorney used a minute ago. secured facility or something. But there should be a balance of that and support for people who are struggling in life or don't have a good family network at home, things of that nature. But I think we have to do better at finding out that balance and being prepared to, at some point, saying there are some people that should not be free to roam around to make bad decisions if they've demonstrated that time and time again.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I just want to highlight that this is a issue that not only affect the victims and the family of the perpetrator, but it has a huge psychological effect on the entire community, the city.
Yeah.
And people have reached out to me that they don't feel safe. So I just want to emphasize what you're hearing in the community as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this is the part I was warning us about. As I want to make sure we get to Chair Metis Castillo's piece of this presentation, and just a reminder that we have a second section that's still in front of us, and we're running a little bit behind. So write down your questions, and if we don't get to them today, we can certainly follow up. But I want to make sure we give folks their time to present what they prepared for us. So Chair Metis Castillo, it's wonderful to have you in the chambers.
Thank you. It's great to be here in the chambers with you. I'm Trista Mattis Castillo, the new chair of the Ramsey County Board, and the newest member to this table. And so thank you for the work over the last year as I've joined my colleague, Commissioner Carter, who continues to be at the table. I think what's really important is that the county is a partner in this work as we move together. We have dedicated $16 million of our ARP funds in Community First Public Safety, which goes upstream to do co-responder models in our 911 system to make sure that we're dispatching the right level to each call, as well as providing mental health services and other wraparound services to free up our law enforcement to do the things that they do best on violent crime, and that we can take care of some of that other work. We'll be hiring an extensive amount of social workers also to help with some of that prevention work ahead. And then the other half of those funds went to our Healing Streets, which is our violence reduction intervention program as well. So we really believe that we have a key role to play in this work. I think what is really important is we've done this work for a long time. In 2005, the county took on an initiative to do juvenile justice reform work and deep end reform along with the Annie Casey Foundation, and really to take a look at not only how do we do this work and intervention, but that we're also doing it through a lens of racial equity. We have to be really careful in these moments when there's fear, and our gut reaction is to respond out of fear, to go back to what we've done before that wasn't working, quite frankly. And so just to address Councilmember Prince's comment about Boys Totem Town, there's no evidence that says the increase of crime is connected to Boys Totem Town's closure. In fact, it wouldn't explain the increase of crime across the whole country on these levels. We're seeing similar data, and that's not an excuse that we're not addressing it here in St. Paul, but we're seeing similar data in other places. And so we just want to make sure that we're doing the right interventions and reforms that's really going to help our community, and that we're really taking apart the different types of crimes so that we're addressing them appropriately, whether it's youth and who is committing crimes or adults. Violent offenders are held. They're not released. I think that's what's really important, that people understand, and that we're really working on how do we prevent this crime upstream and how we can be a partner to make sure that if there's a gap in the system or a part of the system that isn't working, that's the role that we play. So the county is at the table. We're fully in support of this work to make our community safe, not just feel safe, but to be safe, and that we're here at the table.
And you mentioned that you had an update from our the
Yes.
corrections department. Is there anything from that highlights? I mean, obviously we can invite them in.
Yes. Thank you, Council President. Yesterday, we had a deep end reform workshop from corrections and probations that was data-driven, extensive on work both with adults as well as juvenile offenders. I'm happy to email that link and recording. I highly encourage you all to take a look at it. It's some really good data on work with reducing recidivism rates, what that looks like, how we do that work, and what those holistic wraparound services are to help people truly get to a better place and to do intervention and prevention ahead of time, as well as rehabilitation that's effective and work. So I'll be happy to send that to all of you after the meeting.
Great. Mr. Tolbert.
Yeah, just a few comments. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I do want to point out, I know that we talk about it as much, but on the data, people will notice that the carjackings only has a couple years of data, and I know the chief of police always mentions this, is we weren't keeping track of it because it wasn't really happening. The armed carjackings wasn't happening at the levels that we have, and so we only have a couple years of data on that. But I think that's a good example of our police department using really good data, not only to be transparent, but to allocate resources appropriately and change tactics and ways that we're enforcing some of these crimes that are happening. I do want to note, from what I can tell, we're one of the few cities, especially in Minnesota, for sure in the Twin Cities, that is actually keeping this data. And it's not to say that the crime only happens within our boundaries. It's just that we have the data so that we can react appropriately. I think we're all hoping to get more data metro-wide because we know these armed carjackings and other gun violence is happening, not just in other parts of Ramsey County, but throughout the Twin Cities metro area. But I also want to, appreciate, in this case, what we're talking about here. And, I was thinking back to a lot of the conversations that I had with constituents, especially last year and, some this year. But people are like, well, why is this happening? As a city council member, I know that we feel, we have some authority over the police budget, but we're not the enforcers. We don't prosecute. The city doesn't prosecute these types of violent crimes. That's the county attorney's office that prosecutes it. The judges are obviously involved. The community corrections is involved. The state of Minnesota is involved. And so I remember walking through all these different things, with each constituent, like, well, this is this person, this is this person's job, this is this person's job. And then you got something like the bail fund to explain on top of that, has been a problem. It's a non-governmental entity, but the bail fund that was bailing violent criminals out. And when you explain all those things, they're like, well, who should I turn to? And as a constituent, it's a really hard thing to do, because even as a city council member, it's like, who exactly do we turn to? And I think the reason this group is so important is because all the people that should be turned to are sitting at the same table. And I think the thing that I came into this group with, and I continue to believe, is that violent crime in our city, any violent crime, as County Attorney Choi said, especially if you're that victim, it's a big deal, and it's not acceptable. It doesn't matter what neighborhood or that it's in, it's unacceptable in our city. And every person here in our city, every law-abiding person, should be able to feel and be safe in the city of St. Paul. And I think that's our end goal. And so one of the things that I think needs to be highlighted is this isn't a either-or approach. This is a all-hands-on-deck approach. And I think, not only through our money, funding, but also through our attention, the city and the county has really invested in this. We've increased funding for the St. Paul Police Department. We've increased funding for intervention and prevention. We've increased funding for Ramsey County's increased funding for community corrections and other initiatives. And I think just like which will be next, the Office of Neighborhood Safety, it's another tool in the public safety tool belt, and an important tool. All the components, and it's not an either or, it's a plus. And that's what I think, not only having this table, but also having so much attention and different ways of attention, whether it's intervention, prevention, arrest and prosecution, all those things are important tools in the public safety criminal justice program. So thank you all for leading on, especially you, County Attorney Choi.
Thank you, Mr. Tolbert. Ms. Naker, and I do want to just point out that we're close to 11.
Thanks, Council President. I'll keep it really brief. I want to thank everyone and acknowledge that I'm still literally physically feeling the tension from the gunshots that were just outside of my home, and I know the entire West Side neighborhood has been rocked by the violence recently, and this is just the exact same thing that so many of our neighborhoods and communities are experiencing all the time. So I appreciate this conversation because I think we talk about violent crime all the time, but what we don't do is talk about it publicly. And it's not clear to people that this is our top priority and that we're all working together in so many different ways. So I think what we're doing today is really trying to daylight that work and those conversations that we're normally having, but they're behind the scenes during part of our day-to-day work. County Attorney Choi, I really want to thank you for your leadership. What I heard in your presentation is what I really feel is true, is that those gaps in how we're all doing the work are where we need to focus. And the coordination that your table is bringing and that hopefully our Office of Neighborhood Safety will bring is how we really focus on those places where people and communities are falling through the cracks. Commissioner Matis Castillo, I appreciate your leadership and saying that the people who have committed violent crimes are being held. I think that's what I hear most often. That's most disturbing to me, is a concern that someone has already offended, already hurt people, and then is not being held to make sure that that can't happen again. And so that's something I really want to focus on in our group this year. And then finally, I just wanted to ask, I think this is something all of us are interested in, to the Council President's point. We hear about violent crime often, we feel responsible, but we have a very limited range of things that we can do as policymakers, especially at the local level. I'm curious if there are specific regulations or ordinances or things that the city can do, especially when it comes to gun regulation and gun crime, to please let us know. We've passed ordinances on catalytic converters, and we've been doing what we can, but I really hope that you'll bring forward to us legislation, because that is an area that we can take action. So thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Prince.
Thanks, Council President Brenmone. I am really delighted that we're doing GBI. This council had a presentation from GBI, I believe it was in 2019. We said, let's do it. So clearly, targeted intervention is the way to go, and I'm glad we're doing it. I have been in pretty regular contact with a family of a carjacking victim, and you know, it's devastating, and we're all looking for answers. I do need to say, and we don't need to go into it now, but we know that the violent people are not being held. I mean, we know that. So if that is our intent, that when we arrest somebody who has committed violence, that they are being held, it just is not the case, as I understand it. So we don't have to argue about it, but I just needed to say that. So thank you for the work of this group. I really appreciate the work of my colleagues, and we're moving in the right direction.
Mr. Choi.
Yeah, thank you, Council President Brenmone, and for that question, Councilmember Prince. I think the important point is, and you said it, that it's not really about an argument to win, because I think I've heard that violent people aren't being released, but then at the same time, I can see some examples of where that's occurred. But I think we need to understand, and sometimes we can't talk about the facts because the laws create a shield of privacy for people to talk about identifying information involving a youth who is under the age of 16, right? But we also have to recognize that we don't control everything. In Ramsey County, we can control those things. But I think the example that you're alluding to, and I think the one that Assistant Chief Thomaser talked about, we also have to have a conversation, not just within our own Ramsey County, right? And it was clearly pointed out to me by Mayor Lee Abrams that we also need to include the suburbs, right? But we also need to include Hennepin County and other counties in our region, because what I'm also seeing is that a lot of some of the individuals who are committing harm, especially in the carjacking context, that a lot of what we might be doing doesn't really matter unless we're all doing it together. So I think another piece of this in terms of our future iteration of the work of the Violence Reduction Leadership Group is that we need to start having some coordination and conversations with other leaders across this region and really delve deep into understanding some of these gaps. And then again, like what we've been doing over the past year, we've got to start pulling in the same direction. I would also say that, you know, like I alluded to earlier in my remarks, that we are starting to now have at the table of the Violence Reduction Leadership Group a deeper conversation around secure placement for youth. I think also, too, we have to recognize, too, that there's also things that we don't control about that system. So a lot of times when a youth is sent to Red Wing, which is the state correctional facility, what people don't fully understand is that the way that the state corrections system works is that if somebody is on extended juvenile jurisdiction, which is oftentimes the resolution that the court is going to impose on a young person to have extended jurisdiction, have adult prison time hanging over their head, is that oftentimes the facility, the correctional facility, is going to release the young person sometimes as quick as 6 months to a year. So this notion that if we believe that somehow sending some youth to some correctional facility necessarily also just eliminates the problem, first of all, we shouldn't be thinking like that, because I think in many ways we need to be thinking about how we get the behavior to stop. But I also agree that we need to have like maybe a place where we're actually, the young person and family are getting the services that they need and where they can't hurt other people. But I think what people don't fully understand is that the facility is going to release them after a 6-month or a year period. The average stay, I think, is about, I don't know, it's about 300 days, if I'm not mistaken. And I think what corrections is trying to do, and this is whether it's a state or a local corrections, is that recognizing that at the end of the day, the youth has to live in our community and figure out a way to be successful. But we need to have some conversations, deeper conversations about demanding those better outcomes, because I think oftentimes we don't put enough attention into this whole conversation about our corrections and also our re-entry, which is a really critical piece of this. I'm really heartened by some of the work that is happening right now in our community, where I think if we're going to send a youth to Red Wing, and I think, quite frankly, I think Ramsey County has probably the most kids in that facility. But we're bringing our community to Red Wing to develop circles of support, recognizing that they're going to be getting out at some point. And then there's also conversations about having some options more available that are local, that are closer to home. Those are all important conversations. They need to be had, and we're going to have them as a part of the Violence Reduction Leadership Group. But I think another piece of this is that we need to also engage the public around the conversations too. So.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate, and I really appreciate that, especially with the recognition that this is a work in progress. We're looking at this facility. Erica Schumacher also mentioned in terms of the learnings of COVID that we have now the capacity and the capability to do group work with families remotely. And so that barrier that used to be a preventative in terms of being able to provide that service really have been broken down. And so when we're at the table and collectively thinking about how do we move forward, if a facility isn't working for us, we don't necessarily need to abandon it. We can fix it so it does the work that we need it to do.
And I just want to make one last point, which is I really appreciate that we are looking at all of this through the lens of equity and racial justice. And a really important point that came out of Chief Thomaser's presentation is that 75% of shooting victims are Black males. So that is an equity issue and a safety issue, and it concerns people who live in my community. And so I think we need to look at that equally urgently.
I think it's a moral issue for us to not do anything.
Absolutely.
Right? Absolutely.
Yep, and as we've heard of several presenters and council members say, this is a 360-degree solution we're looking at. We are not going to point our fingers at one piece of it and blame that for all of our challenges, and recognize that in order to see success, all of these parts need to be functioning and constantly improving. So this is the goal with this group, with this conversation, and with these regular updates. So thank you. I know we need to switch gears and bring our team on to talk about Community First Public Safety. Would you like to close us out, County Attorney Choi, or are there other comments, or should we shift?
I just again wanted to thank you, Council President, and members of the council today for having this conversation, and also being really committed to it, because it would have been really easy just to get just a little bit of information, and then I guess that in many ways the simplest thing is to just deflect, right? You feel a lot of pressure, so you deflect it off to somebody else, as Member Tolbert talked about, trying to get a constituent connected to this part of the system or that part of the system. But actually taking on the leadership of saying, I want to be a part of the solution. I want to start by learning more. I want to start by developing relationships with other actors in the system, and find out where I can be helpful, right? I certainly could come to this table and deflect all of these things to somewhere else. But that's not going to get us to the solutions that I know that our community wants and needs. And so I think the most important thing that the community and the public needs to hear is that over the past year, we've done the hard work to build the relationships and the trust, and to do the joint kind of learning, and then kind of getting into that mode of actually trying to find the solutions. And I'm really hopeful about our future, because I think we've set ourselves up for a good framework or a base to get this work done to actually reduce violence in our community.
Thank you. I think that's a great hopeful note to shift gears and end on. So thank you very much. I know your time is valuable, and being here and partnering with us is so important. So thank you very, very much for your time and for your hard work. We appreciate you. All right. We are running a little bit behind, as predicted. So we're going to switch gears to Community First Public Safety update. And we will be, let's see, we're going to use our media services to bring folks in via Teams at this point. And Rachel Walsh will be leading the overview about Community First Public Safety. So I think we see you. Welcome. And we'll turn things over to you. I know that I had given 60 minutes on our agenda for your group. So if you can help us stay to an 11:45 end time. Many of us have a meeting that follows this one, so I'm sorry to compress this important information, Rachel, but we appreciate you being here and look forward to the presentation of your team. We have folks from the Coast Unit, the CARES team, the HEART team, and ONS. We're excited to hear what's in store. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Council President Bren Moen, council members. My name is Rachel Walsh, and I'm an innovation consultant with the city. My portfolio includes work to move forward the mayor's Community First Public Safety framework. Together with the mayor, the administration continues working across multiple city departments in partnership with Ramsey County, St. Paul Public Schools, nonprofit business leaders, and community groups to operationalize this model. Utilizing this framework, we are coordinating our response efforts, aligning the work of our partners, and making strategic investments toward reducing the number of emergencies we endure in the first place. In a response to crime, Mayor Carter and his administration has focused on partnering with our police officers, firefighters, and EMTs to add supports that increase the efficiency of emergency responders' time. This includes expanding opportunities for optimal response and co-responder models. Today, we will be focusing on our optimal response teams and highlighting the work which is occurring within and across the teams to respond appropriately, effectively, and efficiently to the needs of our residents and provide seamless handoffs to stabilizing services. I am here in partnership with the leaders of the Community Outreach and Stabilization Unit, the Community Advocacy Response Team, the Homeless Assistance Response Team, and the Office of Neighborhood Safety. The work we are embarking on together over the course of 2022 will move us into this next phase of Community First Public Safety to work in coordination across these 4 teams as the backbone of St. Paul's Community First public safety framework. Our focus this year is to build our connective tissue across these 4 teams by working closely together using a human-centered design process to center the needs of residents we serve and building our optimal response system. This work will allow us to build our internal working systems to share information efficiently, build our processes and policies to send the right team at the right time, and to build a strong network of optimal response teams working in unison to serve our residents. My colleagues will provide you with an overview of the work they are conducting within their teams, lessons learned from our current emergency responses, and the opportunities we seek to leverage in creating a cohesive and supportive response system for our city residents. We will also introduce you to the newly hired staff within our CARES team, HEART team, and ONS, and we will hear from our leaders of our optimal response teams, and we have built in time at the end for questions. We're going to work through and make time for those questions at the end. And so now I'll turn it over to Commander John Loretz from the Police Department to share updates about the Coast Unit.
Good morning, Council President Brenmoen and council members. My name is Commander John Loretz, and I oversee the St. Paul Police Department's Community Outreach and Stabilization Unit, or COAST. Sergeant Justin Tiffany coordinates the daily operations of the officers assigned to COAST. COAST was established in 2018 as a mental health unit based on 2 nationally recognized police mental health collaborative best practices, a co-responder program and a case management program. COAST envisions a community and a city in which all people feel safety is increased and outcomes are improved when police and their partners assist people living with or experiencing mental illness, chemical dependency, and/or homelessness. We believe a healthy community is a safer community, and it begins at mental wellness. We have a responsibility to support and encourage wellness while reducing the stigma related to mental illness, chemical dependency, and homelessness. Since the creation of the COAST unit, we reviewed mental health incidents and learned as an organization that we need to support our community and break paradigms, as 10% of our calls are related to mental health issues. The COAST unit consists of the Mental Health Resource Team, the Recovery Access Program, and the Police Homeless Outreach Program. Comprised of our partners from Ramsey County Mental Health and People's Inc., our embedded licensed clinical social workers collaborate with our specially trained officers to respond to in-progress crisis-related calls for service in our co-responder program and conduct follow-up and outreach efforts in our case management program. Our mission is to identify system gaps between the criminal justice and healthcare systems, which enables the SPPD to connect people in crisis with the healthcare they need, helping to significantly reduce mental health crisis-related arrests and repeat calls for service. Our Recovery Access Program connects individuals who may be experiencing chemical dependency with community-based resources. The RAP program actively monitors suspected overdoses and responds to possible public health threats due to unsafe chemical use and substance abuse by communicating spike increases to the community while conducting outreach, care coordination, referrals to harm reduction services, and distribution of Narcan to people with substance addictions. The Police Homeless Outreach Program provides non-traditional law enforcement services to underserved and vulnerable populations by working with our partners to assist individuals in acquiring short-term housing and provide social support and assistance in locating long-term housing solutions. While the COAST unit is established and working well with our community partners, the volume of people in need of mental health or chemical dependency treatment, as well as experiencing homelessness, has simply overwhelmed our capacity. We greatly welcome and look forward to the development and implementation of the other response teams that you will be hearing from today. COAST will continue to be a resource to share the lessons we've learned and our best practices, which we feel make the St. Paul Police Department an innovative and respected voice in our non-traditional responses to our community by delivering trusted service with respect every day and without exception. Council President Brenmoen and council members, thank you for your time today. I will now turn it over to St. Paul Fire Chief Inks for his team's presentation.
Thank you, Council President Brenmoen, other members of the St. Paul City Council. Thank you for allowing us to present today and provide an update on our CARES team. As you remember, back in November, we presented you an operational idea around a social service response team. And during that time, we discussed the importance of having an intentional response for a specific need. Again, also mentioned back in November, we were going to take a 3-phased approach in the development of our team. Phase 1 being a research phase, which is ongoing. Phase 2 being the onboarding of a team coordinator. And phase 3 being the development of the partnerships and scope of practice, all with the goal of building a team that serves the residents while sending the correct resource to the correct call. So I'm happy today to report that we've done some research, including best practices around the country. And we've also, with the partnership and incredible work by our Human Resources Department, have onboarded our team coordinator. And we are actively engaging with potential partners while responding to our residents today. At this time, I'd like to take the time to introduce you to Dwayne Gibbs, our CARES team coordinator. Dwayne brings what I believe to be a total package to this position. Dwayne is a longtime resident of St. Paul's East Side. He was a member of our St. Paul Fire Department, where he was a firefighter paramedic. And in addition, Dwayne has worked with and in the exact social services that we will be relying on. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dwayne Gibbs, our CARES team coordinator.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chief Inks and Council President Brent Moen. Again, my name is Dwayne Gibbs. I started in this position as a CARES team coordinator 2 weeks ago. I served previously with the St. Paul Fire Department as a firefighter paramedic for 10 years, the last 5 of which I worked in the McAllister Groveland area at Station 14 as an FEO. I left St. Paul Fire to pursue a higher calling in working with at-risk and high-risk youth in East St. Paul with an after-school program, which eventually necessitated starting Harvest Academy to provide an alternative learning environment in order to get several of our youth through high school and on to college. I did this work in conjunction with my work with District 2, the District 2 Council under the late Chris Anderson and most recently the late Susan McCall and Chuck Repke. I've directed the IFI program under Prison Fellowship with the Minnesota Department of Corrections. The IFI program is an 18-month transformational program. And most recently, I worked with Ramsey County as a homeless shelter supervisor and then manager. I'm very excited for this opportunity. I'm really thrilled to see such a concerted and vigorous effort. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Chief Sampson to discuss our vision and plan for implementation.
Mr. Gibbs, before you turn things over to Chief Sampson, the way that you are oriented in your camera on Teams, we can see neither of you. So it'd be great if we could at least, if you could maybe just kind of move to the center of the camera and give us a wave, and then when Mr. Sampson presents, we can see him as well. Just we're only able to see really right between you on the camera. There you go. Hello. Hi. It's nice to see you.
Now?
Yeah, we can. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's we're meeting virtually, so it's nice to at least see you, and we welcome you to the city team. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Chief Inks. Council President Brent Moen, I'd just like to take a quick second and see if you are able to see me as well on your camera, ma'am.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Council President Brent Moen, council members, thank you again for your time today. As previously discussed, we envision the CARES team to be able to assist with 2 major facets of fire's overall call responses, supporting both our sheltered residents in need of assistance, as well as our homeless and sheltered residents in need of additional support as well. So what you see on the slide before you represents just a quick overview of the few of our call types that we feel the CARES team may be able to have an immediate impact upon. Even though we are still in the very early stages of the development of the team, the connections that have already been made with our community providers, as well as our city teams, have already yielded multiple incredible outcomes for not only our most vulnerable residents, but really for our community and our city as a whole. So a couple examples of this just most recently include the efforts in working with DSI's HEART team, PD's COAST team, and along with St. Paul Fire's medical director, as we were able to successfully get a previously unreachable homeless resident with significant physical and mental health issues that was sheltering outside of Union Gospel Mission specifically. We were able to get that particular individual admitted into long-term stable and most importantly, safe care. Also, just in the last 2 weeks, we've also been able to coordinate to get 2 different sheltered individuals that were found to be in crisis admitted for further mental health evaluations. These collaborative efforts with 3 of our city's alternative response teams have resulted in not only the immediate protection of the individuals themselves, but also their families, including young children, as well as the neighbors within their respective housing complexes. So in regards to the actual implementation, there's just one kind of emphasis that I really want to place around the ongoing research component of our CARES team in particular. Simply put, I just want to stress the research phase per se is anything but complete. And I really want to take a quick second and thank Dwayne for all the work that he's doing specifically. He's been in this role for approximately 2 weeks and is really kind of diving into the job head first, if you will, and is really kind of further shaping the future of this team and specifically how the fire department and CARES team fit into the whole community first public safety alternative response approach for the city of St. Paul. And really, we're focusing on what Chief Inks alluded to, the best practices from not only across the country, but here in the metro area as well. So on that, the coordination and collaboration are really going to be kind of the critical linchpin to the success for the CARES team, as well as for just overall for our city and community. And bottom line, the ultimate goal will be the delivery of compassionate service without precondition for our most vulnerable residents for the benefit of the entire community. And with that, Council President Bremoen, council members, I would like to turn it over to Deputy Director Travis Beastadu to provide an update on behalf of DSI's HEART team.
Welcome.
Thanks, Chief. Good morning, Council President Bremoen, council members. My name is Travis Beastadu, and I'm Deputy Director for the Department of Planning and Economic Development. Thank you all for your time this morning. Over the past several years, I've played a coordinating and planning role in the city's response to serving our unsheltered residents. As you're aware, the city of St. Paul is not unlike many other communities in our region and nationally that are seeing an increase in the number of residents who are experiencing homelessness and unsheltered homelessness. This was best evidenced in St. Paul by the unprecedented increase in the number of our residents who are living within unsheltered encampments back in 2020 and 2021. Since then, the city has worked tirelessly and successfully to address encampments through an individualized, people-centered, and trauma-informed approach. However, this deliberate and effective approach is staff-intensive, and that's where the Homeless Assistance Response Team adds needed capacity in this work area. I'm pleased to report that after nearly a year of planning, we've crafted a dedicated team of specialists who will be carrying this work forward. And at this point, I'll ask the HEART team, and they have, turn on their cameras so you can at least put a face with each one of the names. First off, I'll introduce Andrea Hinderacher, who will be serving to fill the program coordinator role. This position will serve as the full-time lead staffer for the HEART team. Andrea has over a decade of experience working with people experiencing homelessness, housing, and in shelter operations. She currently is serving as the manager of the Model City Safe Space Emergency Shelter located in downtown. Until she comes to the city as part of the HEART team starting next week. We're very fortunate to have her unique experience and perspective, and in having her lead the efforts of this HEART team. Andrea's first day won't be until next week, but she's agreed to be here for today's presentation. And in her role, she'll be providing program and operational oversight, policy development in the city's unsheltered work. Next on the team is Rachel Bagleen, who's serving as the housing counselor part of the HEART team. And Rachel's role is to identify the individual's specific unsheltered needs and coordinate that individualized response, as well as to assist in further policy and program development. And last but not least is Sean Westenhofer, who is a DSI Inspector 3. Inspector Westenhofer is a longtime DSI employee who's been doing a fantastic job working with the unsheltered over the past few years, in addition to his other DSI-related code enforcement work. So adding his position as part of a full-time position within the HEART team provides much-needed capacity to provide complaint response and site risk assessments, which are crucial first steps in managing unsheltered encampments. And from here, I will turn it over to our new program coordinator, Andrea, to discuss the HEART goals and several implementation updates. Andrea?
Thank you so much. The goals of this team sound simple, but have been and will continue to be very challenging to accomplish. The team will work to provide a 24/7 response to those who are unsheltered or in need of immediate shelter supports. The team will continue to work to decriminalize homelessness through identifying needs and aligning the individuals with the actual needs to help them transition out of the unsheltered environment. Living in an encampment in St. Paul is not safe, and our goal will remain to identify the unique needs of all people and provide the appropriate shelter and housing options. Although we've been building our team over the past few months, much of the initial groundwork was started many months ago. And this work includes developing a name-by-name registry of unsheltered individuals, providing shelter and housing placement, coordinating mental and chemical health assessments, adapting unsheltered policy to dynamic needs. And an important example of what this looks like and has looked like over the past year is initially, as the encampments were growing, there was a pressure to close these encampments as soon as possible. To quote County Attorney Choi in his earlier presentation, we now are beginning to look at these sheltered or these unsheltered folks with understanding and curiosity, understanding that each encampment is a unique community of people that share a diverse need for different shelters, or they have different barriers. And so to understand the needs and the barriers of each encampment allows a better prioritization of what encampment is most appropriate to close, given the shelter opportunities and the service providers that we've been able to coordinate with. To also, as quoted earlier by Assistant Chief Thomaser, to try to reduce this revolving door, instead to get people on a path out of the unsheltered world and not into an encampment further down the road later in time. Through all of this, we're providing unsheltered advocacy across the region. In this work, we've had several major accomplishments, including successfully managing encampments and transitioning many unsheltered to shelter resources in 2020 and 2021. We've hired all 3 full-time employees of the HEART team as of next week. And as mentioned earlier, we've already dramatically increased the number of shelter referrals that the city is now making. In the 60 days since Rachel Beglin, our housing coordinator, has been on staff, we have increased shelter referrals by 500%.
As our HEART team continues to coalesce over the next few months, we have the following tasks in front of us. Continue to build the by-name registry to learn more about the folks that we're trying to serve while working to place them in shelter, and transition as many of those folks from the unsheltered environment into shelter resources as we continue to thoughtfully close all encampments across the city. And to coordinate with Ramsey County and the continuum of care to use our boots on the ground perspective and data to help inform what future shelter resources look like.
There is a significant alignment between the work of the HEART team that is responsible for and the various other teams that we have discussed here today. I very much appreciate coming into my position working to stand up the HEART team under the umbrella of supports that now exist within the Community First public safety framework. For example, while working with our unsheltered clientele, I know from experience that unfortunately many of these residents have mental health and chemical health challenges. Knowing and using the resources of the COAST team will make this work far more successful going forward. For example, a Rule 25 assessment is needed to access treatment, and a diagnostic assessment is needed to access most mental health services. And this can be completed by the COAST team in real time at a moment of readiness that might not present itself until another crisis occurs. We will have these needs in our day-to-day work, especially during encampment work, when oftentimes folks struggle with the city's changing of their environment and the reality that though camping allows for much desired autonomy that the shelters cannot provide, it's also not sustainable or a safe housing solution. And the COAST team is a significant supporting resource that we have and will continue to use in the future. The medical assistance we will receive from the CARES team in this work will be invaluable as well. There are many heartbreaking situations in our encampment work where basic medical services are needed for our unsheltered residents. But fear of displacement keeps major medical issues unreported. And on the flip side, more minor medical concerns that could be addressed on site with minimal yet effective medical intervention often monopolize city resources to include paramedic 911 calls and hospital urgent cares as a survival mode, or just simply a lack of basic resources. In addition, I see this as a tool and service that we can offer unsheltered residents while we're also trying to engage with them and attempt to encourage other sheltering options. Lastly, the addition of the Office of Neighborhood Safety will further add a critical resource of assistance to our unsheltered work by helping to coordinate to minimize the violence that often walks hand in hand with basic survival instincts with the culture of poverty and within the culture of poverty and homelessness. Crimes of opportunity, survival, trade of people, goods, and services are all a part of the quicksand that takes hold of the homeless community. As every good movie shows us, one cannot get out of quicksand alone. So from here, I will hand the presentation over to City Attorney Olson to discuss the Office of Neighborhood Safety.
Good morning, Council President, Council members, Lindsay Olson, City Attorney for the City of St. Paul. I'd first like to introduce Brooke Blakey, who's our newly hired Director for the Office of Neighborhood Safety. And I'll just be going over a few of the implementation timeline items and accomplishments, and then I'll turn it over to her to introduce herself further and talk with you all about her thoughts for the office that she is about to come into for us. And I'm pleased that she'll be joining the St. Paul and CAO team. Director Blakey grew up in Rondo neighborhood of St. Paul, and she has deep roots in St. Paul community and a broad base of law enforcement, social services, community service experience. She comes to us from Metro Transit Police, and she served there as a captain, chief of staff, and a member of the senior management team. She also oversaw the Met Council Met Transit Homeless Action Team. She has previously worked as a criminal defense investigator for the 2nd District Public Defender, a child protection worker in Ramsey County, as well as a youth program coordinator for YWCA in St. Paul. We're excited to welcome her, and we look forward to the work that we'll be doing together. So I know many of you are already familiar with the background of how ONS came to be. And I just, for those of you who might be new to this, just a few quick words on that. The Office of Neighborhood Safety, or ONS, was built from a recommendation from the Community First Public Safety Commission work. And during the last several months, we've worked with a team from, including Harvard Government Performance Lab, Cities United, as well as Mayor's Office staff, City Attorney's Office staff, and those commissioners that stayed on to implement this work to introduce the ordinance that underpins the Office of Neighborhood Safety and sets out the parameters that was introduced at the February 9th council meeting. And we have also done research on community councils and ONS offices nationwide in conjunction with the Harvard Performance Lab to take a look at how many of these offices are structured to help us build the structure here in St. Paul that makes sense for the community work that we're doing here. Our implementation plan includes onboarding the new director, Brooke Blakey, and once she comes on board next week, we'll be focused on hiring the remaining 3 full-time staff that have been allocated to ONS, as well as developing the Neighborhood Safety Community Council. We'll work very quickly on her 30, 60, 90-day plan, as well as the strategic plan, and I would anticipate that we would be back before you in the next couple of months to discuss that in detail. The upcoming activities that we'll be working on include opening the positions for the Neighborhood Safety Council for community members to apply. The Neighborhood Safety Council will be a council that will be part of the Office of Neighborhood Safety, supported by community members in our community. We'll continue the ongoing coordination of Community First public safety work, including internal coordination with Healing Streets, and work with the White House Community Violence Community Violence Intervention Collaborative, and we'll continue with training and assistance through Cities United as well. This is only a preliminary introduction because we're just beginning to build the work with Director Blakey on board. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Director Blakey for her comments and initial thoughts.
Welcome. Ms. Blakey, you may be muted. There you go.
I am. Thank you. Good morning to the City Council, Council President Bryn Moen. I'm excited to be here this morning, and as Director or City Attorney Olson said, I have a long-standing relationship with all of our partners here on the optimal work team and response work that we're going to be doing here with the Office of Neighborhood Safety, and I'm excited to get started. I've been a member of some of the standing groups, especially the Area Action Plan, with my previous work at Metro Transit, as well as with the Homeless Action Team and the Heart, as well as Coast. And so I look forward to bridging some of the gaps that exist within our public safety and neighborhood safety collaboration and continuum. And I look forward to coming back in the next 30 and 60 and 90 days to give an update on the most important work that we have here at the Office of Neighborhood Safety. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel for any questions. Thank you.
Before Rachel jumps in, but you guys really have this thing scripted. Welcome, Ms. Blakey. It's wonderful to see you, to have you on board. We are so excited to have you here and doing this work. I've known of you for quite a while, but when the press release came out that had your bio in it, I must have said, wow, like 15 times reading through all the accomplishments that you've had and what's brought you to this point in your career. So it's very exciting to meet you. The council is in person Monday through Thursday, and so hopefully we can do that in person, face to face, and so you can see our big smiles behind our masks soon. But we're really pleased to meet you and delighted that you've taken this opportunity to lead our Office of Neighborhood Safety. So welcome.
Thank you again, and I appreciate it. And I am excited to meet everyone in person and get started on this very, very important work that holds a special place in my heart, especially for the city of St. Paul and the community in which I was born and raised. So I'm super excited. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Walsh, you said you were standing by for questions, I believe. Do we? I'm just keeping track of our time right now. We are running low, but I want to make sure folks have questions. Ms. Jalali has been holding her questions till now, so I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you. First, just really second the warm welcome. Ms. Blakey, I met you in a different time when I was riding the light rail overnight to talk to unhoused folks, and you were running the homeless action team. And I remember standing outside Union Depot in the freezing cold with Commissioner Angela Conley, and you were telling us the work underway to take care of folks that we had just got done talking to. And so I've met you in the action. I'm super thrilled you're here. I just want to acknowledge the many ways that I've gotten to know you over the years and the ones that stick out to me. So thank you. I just wanted to take a minute to say that. And my question would be, and I think I'm not sure who this is best directed to, but what really strikes me overall about everything that we've heard is these teams have now been built out. We have systems now in place that we didn't have. There are more supports for people experiencing crisis in our community, and we've all spent significant time shaping that, going through the process to make recommendations that are community informed, and then working with our partners to fund those things. My question is, if I'm a person in the community who wants to access that help, how do I get that help? That's my simple question. Is I think I have a better sense of the work now from like our side of it, from the city side, and all the different staff who are working really hard. But so that I can make sure our constituents get access to this help, when they call me and say, I'm seeing something outside, but I don't necessarily want to call the police, how do I get this or that team out? Could someone speak to that so that we can make sure our community gets to access this really good work underway?
Council President, Councilmember Jalali, that is a wonderful question. Thank you for asking that. That is part of the work that we are taking on in 2022 as we have stood up these teams and staffed them out. Those are all the internal workings that we are working on for 2022 together, and identifying what teams need to respond to what crises and when, and how we dispatch those teams and how folks can access those services. So we don't have all the answers today, but we are working on them this year.
Ms. Jalali.
So as a follow-up on that, if you call 911 right now and you describe it, is it on the other end of the dispatch that there's at least a process where the dispatcher is vetting what's happening and they're understanding, okay, this actually seems like something I could refer this person to who can get this help out there? Is that at least in a rudimentary way underway right now? Or is it more like referral driven, like people who know the staff can contact them?
I see the Deputy Mayor and City Attorney Olson have turned their cameras on, so I'm going to turn it over to them.
Councilmember Jalali, council members, the county is doing a process right now with their emergency communications to connect our teams more succinctly with 911 calls. There's a dispatch model that we need to work through with them. One of the reasons that we're pulling these 4 teams together and the importance of having Coast and the fire department's team is that they do get those 911 calls, and we want to make sure that until we get to the dispatch model that we want through the ECC, that we have the ability for these 4 teams to coordinate and collaborate and do a baton toss when one of the other teams is better equipped to provide an optimal response for those 911 calls.
Thank you.
And in addition, we can make sure that everybody has the contact information so that the referral-based piece can also be happening at the same time. I know that Rachel in particular has been taking a lot of referral calls for supports that are needed.
I look forward to that building out, and I was just about to give the example of Rachel because before we didn't necessarily have a Rachel to refer constituents to when they said we have an encampment, but we don't know we don't want to call SPPD for it, but who do we call? So I do see the work in motion. I know the work is happening. I appreciate some understanding of the work to integrate all of that. It's a whole new system, and it's in early stages, so that's helpful to see. And again, thank you for all your hard work.
And I just think on that point, we want to get to a place where we of course are going to call 911. There should not be 500 different phone numbers for people to call to access help. So you call 911. I mean, that's where we're headed. And then dispatch is responsible for identifying the appropriate response to the call based on the information given to them. Ms. Prince, Ms. Jalali, and I are members of the Ramsey County Dispatch Board. We're participating in guiding that process. But I do think that is the intention, because right now it is this very morning, a constituent reached out with exactly the question you're outlining, Ms. Jalali, and I referred her to 911 and said, start out by saying, I'm calling you for these reasons, but I think we want to make sure that everybody knows who to call, no matter what the crisis is. Ms. Prince?
Yeah, thank you, Council President Brenmoen. The dispatch board is actively working on this right now. They've sent us some information about that work, so that's all being coordinated and thoughtfully processed.
Yeah, and we've stepped up our presence on that board, I think, for that very reason. Ms. Prince was holding it down for a while, and we joined rank, so. Ms. Yang, you had a hand up.
I did, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation today. I felt the biggest value that I took away from it was really being able to see all of the different teams that we have operating, how you're all coordinating and delegating work to each other so that there isn't overlap. And I think that's phenomenal. We definitely need to keep doing that. I do want to bring up a couple concerns or requests that I do have. As you know, in the east side, we have, especially when we saw the rise in encampments and folks who were unsheltered. My staff and I, we met many folks who were Hmong, Karen, and one of the reasons, one of the things that I'd like to know is like within all our 4 teams here, like what's the racial makeup of our teams? What are different like unique qualities that they bring to the table? Because as we are serving folks who are especially from immigrant refugee communities, there are so many barriers that come with that, from language barriers to sometimes folks not even having documentation and really needing support on how to get that. And those were experiences that I saw and were able to observe like through conversations that I had with people who were unsheltered. And so I'd like to see like that information about our team makeup. And in the case where you are talking to somebody who has there's a certain barrier, our staff aren't able to meet that, what do you do in that situation?
Councilmember Yang and council members, I'll take that. We can certainly follow up with the racial makeup of our current staff on these teams. All of our staff works with many community partners. And so to your specific question, right now we want to make sure that we have those close relationships with you and others who can help us make sure that we're connecting with all of our communities and getting the supports. Many of our nonprofit and community partners have a lot of those resources that we rely on, and we can fill a navigator role to make sure that we're getting those resources to folks.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions or comments for the Deputy Mayor or Ms. Walsh? Looking to my colleagues. All right, it looks like we don't have further questions. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Jalali.
If there aren't questions or comments, I guess I would just share a comment that for me, this represents years of work that I've personally put in trying to shape a lot of these, that this council's come around and supported. I remember very vividly a few years ago, community members in this chamber wanting a commission where they could inform our community safety strategy. I remember them asking for it to be funded. I remember folks saying we want to be able to get help for different types of emergencies. There's so much work and coordination that has gone into you all being able to present today, and I just didn't want to let the moment come and go without acknowledging this is the work in action. It is laborious. Sometimes it's not actually a simple, clear through line that is explainable. It is complex because people are complex, and we're trying to help people and take care of people. And I saw that overlap when you shared the teams and could see everyone has a little piece of responding because it's about coordination. So I just want to acknowledge that and say, you know, I see you all doing significant amounts of work that is around the clock, that's complicated, and that is ultimately about having a more humane community where we have a better, more trained workforce, to Councilman Yang's point, that represents and reflects who we are and who we're trying to serve. I just think that's very critical to acknowledge. And I know that we're in the early stages of this work still, but it also feels like we have turned a corner, and I think that's a really important victory for our community. But as Councilwoman Prince, I think, said, we don't want to take a tone of, we're not done anywhere near close to it, but I am personally celebrating that these things are underway and that there's a clear organizational chart, that there's a director, that we have leadership that's committed to it from the very top. I think that's really worth underscoring, and I appreciate it a lot.
And Ms. Jalali, piggybacking a bit on your point, we are at the beginning stages of this work. We've been talking about it for a long time. We've been setting the stage. One thing that I'm noticing more and more is that our partner Ramsey County and the city are using data to track our outcomes and making evidence-based choices on how we're going to move forward with these programs. And instead of just throwing money at an idea and not ever tracking to see if it's working or adjusting. And I think that gets to the point of our work with the unsheltered homeless and how we've really shifted our work there to be very personal and to respond to the actual needs of the individuals. I think with Workforce Innovation Board, the reports that we get back from Mr. Tolbert and Ling Becker are really showing us that the money that we're putting into workforce needs to result in outcomes of increased wages. And I believe that as we go further into our community first public safety work, as well as a group violence intervention, that we are going to be able to track the data, see what's working. And I think our role in a lot of this is to hold these groups accountable And then talk about how we can adjust and make those changes. A lot of the work we do isn't the boots on the ground, but it is kind of that oversight role. And so we'll continue to be monitoring these things and recognizing that it'll take a while to get that enough data to actually analyze. But it looks like we have a great team in place, and we're really pleased to see that today. I saw Mr. Tolbert had a hand up. No. Okay. Other comments here today before we wrap? All right, ton of information. I'm sure that we actually could talk about it for the rest of the afternoon, but I'm reminding my colleagues that follow-up org committee and policy sessions are in order. If there's things we'd like to hear more about, I certainly would like to hear more about corrections, and so I'll put that on the list. Remember that our Director of Council Operations, Brenhouse, is leading kind of the organization of that, so if something comes to your mind, let her know. But thank you for participating today. I know that a lot of this information is raw and poignant today, especially after a violent start to this year. And I'm pleased to be in partnership with all of you and the community stakeholders in working towards solutions because it's unacceptable. So if there's nothing else to come before us today, we're adjourned.